Okay, we back with another video. Today, obviously, we're going to be going over a video by a guy named Xander Hall that you should go check out. He's a lot more popular than I am. He has a better setup and, just does, I gotta admit, just does everything a little better than I do. And we're going to be talking about the alt-right pipeline. So I tried to do a video on this before, but it got, not demonetized, but it just got taken down because people said that I was spreading like hate speech or something like that when I was discussing the topic of how, because I think I was going over somebody, I think it was Yellow Flash or something, who was trying to say that the alt right pipeline wasn't real when the alt right pipeline, even though it's done changed its setup a couple of times over the years, is very live and real. A few days ago, I was doing Uber Eats deliveries on my motorcycle, moped, whatever. I made a video talking about it, and and I think I did in a couple of other videos talking about it. But I'm gonna go over this video, by Xander Hall and just talk about, you know, how easy it is, or how people can get indoctrinated into being not necessarily a Nazi, but just like somebody whose mind is infected with right wing propaganda.
Mrs. Obama, I've done it.
Oh, whoops. I was long into this video.
For a few reasons. For starters, I didn't really take YouTube as seriously back then, so I kind of rushed the
Nobody
script.
did.
I didn't include quite a few things that in hindsight were very important and very relevant to my radicalization. I also wasn't even a leftist when I made those videos. I was still identifying as what I now know to be a neoliberal, so my political views have changed even more since I made those videos. And I think where I am now politically...
I always found it ironic that a lot of people that started out as like anti-SJWs, up to and including Nazis, are now like full like libertarian socialists or social democratic leftists. I always find that funny. But I think the true problem about why this happens is because the thing is the taint of liberalism. Liberalism in America does not allow you to discuss ideals outside of conservatism and liberalism. People are looking for liberation. People are looking to change things and make things better for themselves in society. And left-wing thought in our country is pretty much suppressed. It's suppressed through all the media organizations. It's suppressed in our education system, and it's suppressed even by our politicians when they're discussing things on stage about how they can make life better, because you're more likely to because the thing, and also I have to say, is that the right wing people, especially fascists or people that turn out to be fascists later on, are good at selling fake pro men working class populism, and that convinces a lot of young men to turn right.
Is really relevant to the overall story. I've also learned a lot about YouTube, politics, and radicalization these last 8 months, and when I look back at those two videos, I really can't help but cringe. So in light of all this, I decided to essentially remake those two older videos and create a remastered version with better audio quality, editing, a less rushed script, and a more holistic approach to telling the story. This means that I'm not just going to be telling the story from my point of view, I'll also be interjecting to add context to certain events, describing the political landscape online or in America at certain points in the story, as well as adding a few disclaimers about some of the creators I'll be discussing as well. With all that said, hopefully you enjoy the remastered telling of how I fell down the alt-right rabbit hole and how I got out. To properly tell this story, I need to start with how I was raised before even having access to the internet, because as I now know, there's a lot of real-life factors that make someone susceptible to falling down the rabbit hole. I was raised from the ages of 3 to 10 years old by a single mother. My biological dad and mom never married, and I have no memory of my biological father. I was also a single child. Since I was being raised by a single mother who came from an already not very wealthy family, we didn't have much money growing up. We sometimes moved around the Tampa area from apartment to apartment as the rent got too expensive for us to stay any longer. My mom identified as a liberal and a feminist. She taught me that I should treat everyone equally, no matter their race, sexuality, ethnicity, or gender. She explained to me what racism, sexism, and homophobia were when I was pretty young, and since my mom wasn't religious or anything, I was never taught to believe in God or any superstitions. So, growing up, even at a very young age, I was pretty socially progressive. In fact, if you asked me,
Yeah,
I
get
probably
some of
even
you leftists
understood
on a
to a
God
degree that
thing
rich
yet.
people were stomping all over poor people like us who could barely get by. If
Simple
I remember
fact.
correctly, I heard the terms liberal and conservative for the first time when watching an episode of American Dad. And my conclusion after the episode was that, yeah, I was a liberal. I wasn't racist, homophobic, sexist, and the show gave the idea that those were things that conservatives were. This was probably my first real interaction with politics, even if I was like 7 years old at the time. Things weren't
The
always.
irony, you can be all of those things and still vote Democrat. Like myself, sadly, because even when I was the deepest into my 2015 to 17 anti SJW bullshit era, I still voted for Hillary Clinton, but I didn't have the best views on other people, not even my own. And I guess, unlike, like Xander Hall or Faraday or Hunter Avalon, I guess me personally, because some things that I did, I didn't like hate crime anybody or nothing, but, or the ways that I used to think, I gotta admit, I do carry guilt with me, similar to the way that Chris Reagan does.
Is perfect between me and my mom. In fact, they were oftentimes bad. Me and my mom fought a lot. She was overly strict, yelled way too much, like over just about anything. And to this day, I don't really like her because of it. I know this all seems like way overly personal, but I promise it's all extremely relevant to my radicalization. In 2008, it was time for Bush to leave the presidential
Bye
office, and this
bye.
was the first time an election happened, and I was old enough to remember it. The primaries came down to Hillary and Obama. My mom voted for Hillary and my grandmother Obama, and Obama ended up being the Democratic nominee
Because
and
he's
then the
the better
president.
candidate,
My family was
trust
pretty
me.
happy when Obama was elected, and so was I. He held beliefs I was pretty sure I agreed with, and most of all, he was a black man. I was alive to see America's first ever black president, and this was a big deal. This is a huge historical event. I know this may not seem like much now, but this gave me the idea when I was young that racism and other kinds of bigotry were dying out, going
Yep.
extinct. At least in
Everybody, including a lot of black people nowadays, even older black people, feel like, especially ones born during the passage of and born after the Civil Rights Act, feels like, and then you see, some black people out there like Barack Obama or Oprah Winfrey or even rappers at the time like I'm talking about at the time in the 2000s, not now necessarily, but like like 50 Cent and whoever else was popular at the time, or Lil Wayne was rapping at this point in time too. You see all these black people getting rich, being rich, or even staying rich from the 80s to the 90s, or even sometimes before that. And you start to hear like less overt racism because nobody's going out, especially in politics, saying the N word. But at the end of the day, they sell racism through dog whistles. And when you're a young person, you don't know about white supremacist dog whistling that the Republicans used to partake in. Now, don't get me wrong, the frequency of the dog whistling and even sometimes it's overtly being bigoted towards different groups of people has stepped up in the past couple of years, but to an untrained ear, a Republican speech from Ronald Reagan or, the first George W. Bush or the second George W. Bush or any of the people that was in their campaign, even back to Nixon, you would because this is all they have to say. They'd be like white supremacy has no place here. Now turn the page as I talk about welfare cleans and how there are crime ridden cities like Detroit and Harlem and how dangerous it is in South Central. You know what I'm saying? Even the way that I think that was the first George W. Bush responded to the Rodney King riots. Completely irresponsible. But because he didn't say, because he quote unquote condemned the police brutality, and he quote unquote condemned racism to an untrained person, somebody that's not a leftist especially, or even a more experienced liberal, it would come off as, oh, this guy's not racist. He said that the cops were in the wrong, but we do gotta have peace. And you won't really hear it. You won't really hear it. And this way of thinking, made it a lot easier, ironically, to sell people the lie that SJWs of any sort, be it feminist or, LGBT people, pride activists and, Black Lives Matter activists and people who are activists for immigration, even though often at the time these are all the same people, it was easier to sell the narrative that these movements were not about equality, but, quote unquote, taking power from the quote unquote straight white men. If you go back in those videos from a couple of years ago, you hear constantly how they talk about straight white men this, straight white men that. And at the end of the day, these are movements about equality, but because you feel that there is equality and because you don't directly see racism or sexism or homophobia in overt ways, unless like it was some shit like Waco, I believe that happened in the 90s, you won't really feel like we live in a racist society. So when you hear somebody still saying like, hey man, racism is still a thing, there's a lot of people still suffering, you be like, you're full of shit. So it becomes easier to sell people the narrative that racism just disappeared.
America. My thought process was, how can a country full of racists and white supremacists elect a black man to lead it? At this point in my life...
Easily. Sometimes, well, I put it like this. Racism is such a complicated phenomenon because I'm not saying President Obama was racist, but if the black man in question, which Obama wasn't, is not a threat to the status quo of the rich people and the white supremacist social structures that we have, they don't care if he's president. But if it was somebody that was actually a threat, ironically enough, like the white guy Bernie Sanders, they want to shut him out. Barack Obama was a neoliberal, for normal people out there, who had a few socioeconomic reforms and, of course, had good rhetoric on racism. But, he had good policies like Obamacare and stuff. But Barack Obama's reforms, I guess partially because the Senate was locked up too, and other things like he continued with the United States, like War Machine and what have you. But Barack Obama is not and was not a threat to the status quo of the United States of America. So people will easily step aside and let somebody like him be president. Not to say that it wasn't met without its aberrations though, or not aberrations, but it's stumbling blocks. People were trying to say he was from Kenya and all type of shit back in those days.
I just developed the assumption that any bigots that are still out there were either in hiding because it's socially unacceptable to be intolerant, or living out in the middle of nowhere playing the banjo and fucking their cousins. I learned about the Holocaust and slavery in school, but they taught me that the Civil War was about states' rights, and that the Nazis had all basically died out after World War II.
That's that good old Florida education. At least I would want to say I was a step ahead on that, but the only reason why is because, of course, I went to a northern inner city, predominantly black school. A lot of southern white schools and even some northern suburban schools will try to sell kids this narrative that racism was just a million years ago and everything was fixed after the Civil War or after 1968.
War II. In my young, naive mind, all these things happened a long time ago, and they didn't really have an impact on the world anymore. When I was younger, we didn't have a lot of money, like I said before, but there was one thing I loved to do more than anything, and that was playing video games. I had a variety of consoles my mom or my grandma got for pretty cheap at yard sales or flea markets, and I would play games on a computer when I could, but I never had consistent access to computers or the internet until I was 10 years old when my mom met my stepdad. He's a cool dude, and he holds the same political beliefs as my mom. Nowadays, they're both neoliberal Buttigieg supporters, with maybe Bernie as their second choice. But not long after they started dating, more money was coming in, and after we moved to an actual house, we got internet, and I got an old desktop PC.
I gotta admit, I kind of live like this too, because with a mixture of my parents working in some forms of fixed income, we were able to afford a little more than the average family. So I guess from a personal standpoint, for me, I started to, I gotta just say, sometimes I knew that people went through things because of social reasons. I'm not going to say socioeconomic because I didn't know what the fuck that meant back then, but they went through things because there's things on top of things on top of things. I knew that as a child, but I always kind of felt, people, parents doing drugs or abusing them was a them problem. And I didn't realize that it was a social problem, of kids, especially inner city black kids, not having this or that. So I was easily sold talking points of, different kinds of people just being lazy instead of just simply different kinds of people being at a disadvantage.
Finally, I was able to browse the internet at my leisure, not at a school computer lab or a public library. It didn't take long for me to get way more into YouTube. Before getting my own computer, YouTube was just a website full of cat videos and pivot stick figure animations we would watch on the school computers when the teachers weren't looking.
Yeah, literally, dude. Back in these days, I will never forget. I'm a little bit older than my man Xander Hall. I'm 28. I think he's like 21, 22 or some shit. But back in the day, yeah, YouTube was purely for having fun. The political content as you know it today, be it leftist, liberal, right wing, or far right, did not necessarily exist. I believe news channels, of course, had their biases and they had the news, but people did not. People votes were like not literally not swayed by people like the Quartering or someone like Bosch. People that are political titans on YouTube, like Hassan and all these other people, internet culture in general, just did not. Political internet culture, that is, did not exist like it does now. And a lot of the going to YouTube was for fun. Like we would watch like Dragon Ball Z Abridged or Alucard Abridged or epic rap battles of history or or pirate shit. Like back in the day. For example, every Transformers show was uploaded. You can watch Dragon Ball Z, you can watch Naruto and Power Rangers and whatever other nerd shit that you want to watch. Plus, of course, this is back when video review culture was starting to become a thing too. So you can watch a lot of reviews for different toys or games that you wanted. Or you used to watch, of course, gameplay. You'll turn on a 360p video of the next PS2 or PS3 game that you wanted. Like for me, it'd be like Burnout Paradise or something, and you'll watch your clips and see the gameplay and watch that same 2-minute clip until the game came out. And I dare even say this: Let's Play videos didn't even exist in the same way that they did. Let alone anything about monetization. People being professional gamers. People who thought of professionals, like how Nigel Houston is a professional skateboarder. Trevor Martin is a professional fucking gamer. That didn't exist back then. I guess to some extent it did, but it was not transcending in culture like it is now.
But with unfiltered access to it, I discovered the gaming community on YouTube. The idea of just recording yourself playing a game and uploading it to YouTube for thousands to see, making money from it, it blew my mind. Eventually I would discover a new game called Minecraft, the first online game I would ever play. When I was asked to make a username, I chose PigPuncher368, since the first thing I did on the free version was punch a pig, and 368 were the middle 3 digits of my grandmother's phone number, and now you know the origin of my username. At this point, I was only 10 years old, and there wasn't really any politics on YouTube, at least not in the communities I hung out in. You see, back then, everyone was trying to grow their channels and potentially create a career for themselves, and this meant that being controversial was
everybody kept it to themselves. I think a good example of the apoliticality of YouTube up until about 2015 was like this epic rap battles of history video, right? You had, I believe, Barack Obama battle rapping Mitt Romney, right? And they would rap out their disagreements. Then literally at the end, he had Abraham Lincoln come out and rip both of them, and battle rap both of them. So that way, nobody opinion was swayed one way or another. It was just still a fun little video of presidents battle rapping each other. And you could not necessarily, obtain a political view from the video because a, dead man was in it, Abraham Lincoln.
Counterproductive. One of the unofficial rules of being a YouTuber at the time was never talk about politics. Since no one I ever watched expressed their political opinions, and I always had this stereotype in my head that all conservatives were old white dudes out in the country who were never on the internet, I just kind of assumed that all these young YouTubers I was watching were liberals, or at least not racist or homophobic or sexist. Things continued like this for a while until 2012 when I was on the internet for the first time during a presidential election. The election was between Obama and Romney. Now, most YouTubers kept to the rule of not talking about politics at this time, but some channels I watched did cover the topic of the election. For example, Epic Rap Battles of History.
Oh, look, my dog knows.
Obama
Exactly.
and Romney have a rap battle, and Abraham Lincoln drops in on a giant bald eagle to endorse Obama. Obama was elected for a second term, and political talk in these parts of the internet I hung out in kinda ceased. However, as I got more into online gaming and it became more popular, something big happened. What we would now call the boomers escalated their assault on video games. If you're old enough to remember, the largest figure leading this video games are bad for kids and cause violence crusade was a Florida lawyer by the name of Jack Thompson. Most of the younger people watching probably won't remember him because he's since been disbarred and is totally irrelevant nowadays, but back then, he was the gaming community's biggest enemy. All sorts of YouTubers and even just normal gamers united to tear this guy a new one. They would cite studies that refuted Thompson's claims and would make fun of the mainstream news media for platforming them and their out-of-touch conservative beliefs. All of this cemented my belief that the gaming community is full of a bunch of young people who are smart and progressive and understand that the mainstream media and conservatives are out of touch. We would point out that conservative media would often use violent video games as a scapegoat for school shootings when clearly access to firearms and bad mental health was the real issue. Sadly, even my neoliberal parents fell for this trap and would rant at me about how CSGO is going to turn me into a terrorist. You're probably wondering what any of this has to do with the alt-right rabbit hole, right? Well, I promise, it's all relevant to my story, and of many others my age who had the same experience.
Yep.
When Gamergate came around, everything changed. In hindsight, the internet, and especially the gaming community, seemed to take a pretty big turn, and so did I.
I think at the end of the day, Zan, that's kind of a freaking understatement, dude, because the problem was at this point in time is that I think, like, you know, there was some shit even dug up that Steve Bannon and a bunch of other dipshits had targeted fans of, like, you know, alternative culture, alternative pop culture, people who like anime, comic books, and video games, who were disaffected, felt lonely, felt disrespected. They purposely targeted our communities with a white supremacist movement. So back in like 2015, 16, and 17, almost every fucking YouTube channel was fucking infested with like right wing way of thought thinking and anti SJW this and the feminists are gonna do that. You could not watch a video about almost literally anything. I think the only community that stayed apolitical but its leftwards vent is kind of coming out now that stayed apolitical was the Transformers community. Every other community, whether it was the just anime shit like Dragon Ball, Bleach, and like Naruto, fucking game reviewers, gameplay walkthroughers, people who talked about the history of how certain shows or anime and comic books were made. It seemed like back in this time, every fucking body who was creating these videos had a right-wing bias. Even some of the black people. You had black dudes on there talking about how the SJWs are hurting men and why you need to take initiatives against the feminists and shit like that. Some feminists themselves, and I think the biggest ironic part about our community being infected with this way of thinking, our communities, whether it's gaming, the anime community, comic book community, and this continues to be a problem till this day with bastards like Nerdrotic or No Bullshit was a good one at the time, but he's not really active anymore, I hear. The Quartering, that son of a bitch, is that the movies, video games, the comic book media, the mangas and animes were expressly written often at a time with a left-wing bias. And it's easy to miss because they be like, I just want something. Let's take that one video and over. How about X-Men? X-Men is clearly an allegory to the civil rights movement, but it's just to an untrained person. Or even Captain America, that's an even better example. To an untrained person. Or to Naruto, a show about a fucking orphan. Dragon Ball Z, a show about colonialism and racism and overcoming your oppressor. Point being is that all this media has a left-wing bias, but somehow down the line you just get used to seeing Captain America punch Red Skull, but you don't realize that Captain America's first comic book was him punching Hitler, and that he represented what America could be, and the possibility of what we could be if we work together. Or X-Men, being about the civil rights movement, could be an allegory to queer people, or black, or Hispanic, Jewish people, whatever you want to say, about people's plight in society, and not to judge and treat people so differently because of who they are. Expressly said by Stan Lee. And like I said, so much of this media, especially late 2000s and early 2010s Transformers content with the aligned continuity and the Workers' Revolution led by Megatron. Don't even get me on that. But a lot of this media had a left wing bias, but it went over our head because I guess a lot of it was so well written, and we were just focusing on the action and the immersion of the story that we missed out on the political messaging of these movies and shows. But I guess for me personally, especially after coming out of my little NTSJW little bullshit that I was in, I became even more, immersed in loving of these franchises, these things, these comic books, these games, these animes and mangas. After I learned that they were about civil rights, that makes it even better for me.
The internet always had its darker places, and I was always a fan of dark and edgy humor, and still am. But around this time, the most popular memes went from this... Chocolate rain. The school books say it can't be here again. A song about institutional racism still being prevalent and inescapable. Yeah, that's actually what Chocolate Rain is about. I'm not even kidding. To something more resembling this.
Mrs. Obama, I've done it. I've stopped racism. Thank you, Skipper. Now I am free to roam this earth. Not if I have anything to say about it, and I do. I'm gonna say the N-word.
Now granted, we weren't quite there yet, but looking back, the comedy on YouTube was definitely taking a turn. Now, when Gamergate came around, I didn't even pay much attention to it. I was one of those people who heard about it and kinda knew what was going on, but I was too busy playing Minecraft to really care. I heard it was about gaming journalists taking bribes from developers to write positive game reviews or something, but then I heard my parents mention it. They'd been watching the news, and the boomers on there said something about it being a misogynistic neckbeard brigade to get women out of the gaming industry. I already believed the mainstream media hated gaming for whatever reason, and anything they reported about it was probably false and a smear against the gaming community. So when I heard my parents saying these kind of things, I just sort of rolled my eyes and ignored it. So I just sort of went with the idea that Gamergate was about ethics and gaming journalism. This all happened around the same time that I was becoming a teenager, and like most teens, I wanted independence from my parents. My mom was very strict, and I found myself rebelling against her in whatever ways I could get away with. And I found myself questioning my beliefs since I wanted to be an independent person, not just a carbon copy of my parents' beliefs. Around this time, my views of feminism and women started to change as well, for a variety of reasons. For starters, when me and my mom would argue, she would often claim that I was talking back because she's a woman and I don't respect her because of that. This obviously wasn't true, and if it was just that, I would have just rolled my eyes and moved on. But around that time, I was in middle school and trying to find my first girlfriend. Problem is, I wasn't the best looking guy back then, and I got rejected by every girl I liked. This led me to browsing some strange corners of the internet for advice on girls. I frequented Yahoo Answers, where I would ask questions and advice on how to get a girl, and I would read other answers to people's questions that were similar to mine as well. But the consensus in a lot of these answers was that women only like jerks, and nice guys finish last. That infamous slogan that I imagine led many guys to becoming incels. Also, a lot of the TV shows I watched portrayed feminists as being man-hating and violent, such as this scene from an episode of that 70s show where the main character, Eric, goes in to kiss his girlfriend in a park when her hair gets stuck. An awkward scene ensues where he's trying to get the hair unstuck, but he accidentally yanks her hair, making her scream a little. This results in a group of feminist protesters that were nearby mistakenly assuming that he was assaulting her. They run up, and strip him naked, beat him up, and write pig in Sharpie on his forehead and send him home naked. Not long after, we get this scene.
Yeah, I'm real proud of them. They stole all my clothes.
I think I should have let it continue past it, but I guess this pause is okay. But what I was gonna say is that yes, this is like what I said earlier at about 9 minutes in about this video. Is that yes, they started, to try to portray, because feminists at the end of the day, especially women who are not TERFs, by the way, I mean like actual intersectional feminists, are some of the most strongest, caring, and ready to reach out people on the freaking planet, who care usually about more than just feminism and stuff. These are the same people who help the homeless. These are the same people who stand up for Black lives. These are the same people who stand up for queer people. These are the same people who you can go to and talk to about things that you don't understand in your life, whether you're male or female. But society kept portraying people who were radicals against the status quo as loud, degenerate, mean, and aggressive. A better one than this is like the movie Forrest Gump, where they portrayed the Black Panther Party as being like a bunch of violent people who abused women, and made it so that the woman wound up with AIDS at the end of the movie. That's an even better example. But both media and people, in general, especially a lot of right wing people, which I think is necessary to address too, will portray people with left leaning and transgressive ideals as being violent, even to the point of going to their protests, their strikes, and their demonstration and trolling until they got a reaction out of somebody. Or if not, putting their hands on somebody themselves.
Yeah. On top of all this, I didn't really see any apparent reason for feminism to be necessary. As far as I could tell, women had equal rights. I mean, they could vote, work a job, and were generally treated the same as men to me. So while I didn't hate feminism and think it was evil or anything yet, at this point, I started to see it as somewhat useless and misguided. I believe the stereotype that feminists were just ball-busting man-haters. However, I still thought that misogyny and sexism were bad, and I was repulsed when I saw an undeniable instance of it in real life or media. I also never at any point went full incel.
See, that's that thing that I say at the end of the day. And I also never went full incel too. I always kept trying. But how bigotries of any kind are sold through dog whistles. Nobody's gonna go on stage and just say that women don't deserve rights. They will say that men are on average smarter and stronger and make better caretakers. Maybe we should do something about that. They're not gonna say let's make it so women can't have bank accounts again, because that'll be political suicide. They know better than that.
But I did spend some time browsing r/incel before it was banned, and while I didn't agree with the worst of what was being said there, I have to admit I agreed with some of it and even felt cathartic to read it. I mostly enjoyed reading the a few millimeters of bone makes the difference between chatting and incel memes. This was before I got braces and developed the chiseled jawline I have now. Even if I was basically wallowing in self-pity, it did feel strange.
I was in college, and I dropped out of college, talking about I can't find a girlfriend, why do women hate me, and I didn't even have a fucking job. I didn't really shave, and I think the only thing I really did every day was go skateboarding. I didn't have a car. I didn't have money to go on dates, get no Uber, no Lyft, or even catch the bus. So, and didn't have the best hygiene either, I even say, or the best anything for that matter. Before I even got my first girlfriend, I realized that I had a road of self-improvement to go through. But even when I got my first girlfriend, a lot of the, I guess psychological damage. I wish I could put a picture up in this video. Maybe my wife will edit it in. Who's a different woman, by the way. But the psychological damage that I, experienced throughout my years of loneliness and self-pity and not understanding certain things about life, it showed. Room wasn't this clean. Clothes wasn't this clean. Face wasn't this shaved. Hair wasn't even this done. Only thing I did was skate, go home. I think I worked a couple of jobs, but I don't really feel like at that time, especially with the bad political views too, and the things I used to say about women, I was not a good man.
Good to know I wasn't alone. In 2015, talk of the 2016 election started, and at the time, Donald Trump was a meme candidate. I mean, nobody took this guy seriously or thought he was going to go very far. I mean, he spoke like he was illiterate, was surrounded by scandals, and no one thought he would be president, even if the mainstream media was constantly talking about him. However, as the months passed and more scandals came out, such as the grab her by the pussy comment and the KKK endorsing him, his supporters became louder and more numerous. In hindsight, I now know that bigotry hadn't died in America like I thought when I was younger. It was just hiding. And now there was a candidate who thought like the bigots and was dumb enough to make it obvious. He didn't even bother dog whistling, so even the dumbest reactionaries knew he was on their side. I never liked Trump. I didn't even like the memes supporting him ironically. The only time I thought they were a little funny was when Filthy Frank would do it, because that was very clearly satirical, like this for example.
You're looking kinda sexy, Donnie.
You make me kinda hard, Johnny.
I still didn't care all that much about politics, but with such a divisive election on the horizon, it was just inescapable. Arguments.
Yeah, it's like, I guess in hindsight, and I'll probably wrap this up soon and just link his video because you should go give it a watch because this is a very heartwarming video for me to watch too that I can just relate to on so many levels. But we're going to keep going. We got time. My wife isn't off work for another hour, so we good. But what I was going to say is that, yeah, even though you didn't like Donald Trump back in that time, especially if you was in like the anti-SJW community, you were kind of like a quote-unquote nerd, you were alternative, an anime fan, gamer, you kind of didn't support him because like I said, I still voted for Hillary, but I was still espousing a lot of ideals that people who supported Trump winded up, and that's why a lot of people want to vote for him, because even if you didn't want Trump voted for, you still espoused a lot of ideals that Trump espoused, or you believe shit like this, like, oh, he's just another Republican like George W. Bush, because fascism. I think I heard the word before in like history documentaries that I watched at the time, but I didn't. I used to believe the shit. I used to be like, son, there's no way fascists exist anymore. Everybody knows fascism is bad. You really had that mindset of it can't happen here until it happens here.
About who's better, Trump or Hillary, started in every comment section, every Facebook post, and every Twitter thread on the internet. Back then, if you were online, you couldn't be apolitical. 2016 was a big year, and the election just became a background meme for me for a while. I got my first job at this place as a lifeguard, and when I was 16, I got my first girlfriend, and broke up with her because my parents made me.
Damn.
And got a varsity letter for swimming on my high school swim team. However, in July 2016, only a day before my 17th birthday, my grandmother died of lung cancer. She'd fought it for a year, but she wasn't able to beat it. She was my best friend, and actually the most progressive person in my life at the time. She participated in a lot of pro-choice marches and protests when she was younger. Because of what I now know as toxic masculinity, I felt like I shouldn't cry or talk about how much I missed her, even when I was completely alone and no one would see. So I didn't. I kept it all bottled up. Only a few months later, in September, tragedy struck again when a hurricane called Hermine came, and it brought massive flooding with it. My whole neighborhood was flooded, under a few feet of seawater. We lost furniture, family photos, I lost my somewhat mediocre gaming PC. We also lost our whole house, so now we were homeless. Thankfully, we had flood insurance and enough money that we could be able to get a new place after we saved up for a while, but we needed somewhere to stay in the meantime. Thankfully, a coworker from my stepdad's job invited us to live in their guest house for a couple months. They were a very nice lesbian couple who owned a farm and had a couple of horses,
Aww.
and if it weren't for them, we wouldn't have had a place to stay. We ended up finding a new place.
Yup, experiences like that really give you new perspectives on people that you're so bigotry against. That's very similar, but not nowhere near the same as like, okay, I remember one day I went downtown skateboarding during the gay pride event. It was the first time I've ever been downtown during a gay pride event in Detroit. So I'm thinking to myself, I'm on my anti-SJW shit like, no pride, and you see like gay people holding hands and shit. But ironically enough, when I was skateboarding and just hanging around, or it seems like every pride where I'm just skateboarding and hanging around, people are nice, people are supportive, people are cool, people ask you to do tricks, people will root for you while you're skating, people will engage in conversation with you and treat you like a human being. And not even being queer myself, but around a lot of queer people, which often the time have a left-wing bent to how they think and feel. I don't feel, it's not that I won't say I don't feel like an outsider, but I just don't feel uncomfortable. I'm not afraid of somebody coming out of the woodwork calling me the N-word or saying I'm gonna snatch the purse. Not to say that gay people can't be racist, but they're less likely to carry forward these beliefs.
There with what we had, just a week before the 2016 election. At this point, the consensus was that Donald Trump was racist, sexist, homophobic, and an idiot whose supporters were either all of those things or just stupid, while Hillary Clinton was the lesser of two evils. Well, we all know what happened election night. Hillary Clinton won the popular vote. More than 1 million more Americans voted for Hillary than Trump, but because of the Electoral College, Trump won the presidency.
Forever giving the fucking Republicans a boost. Wait until we get rid of it.
I was still a liberal, I was still progressive, and I hated to see that an open bigot had won the presidency in America. I didn't have my gaming PC because it was destroyed in the flooding, so I spent a lot of time watching YouTube on my phone to take my mind off the new president. But everything on YouTube was either Trump won, what the fuck are we gonna do, or haha, Hillary supporters crying compilations, you know? However, there was one video on the topic that stood out. It was a video by a channel called Chris Raygun, and it was called Alrighty Then, Weekend Recap. I clicked it because I'd seen his videos in my recommended before, and I was surprised at how entertaining he was. He reminded me of a mix between iDubbbz, Justin Roiland, and the guy who made Invader Zim. I mean, seriously, come on, the resemblance is striking. Now, before I go any...
What I was going to say is that it's like I said, in general, in the alternative and nerd community, in general, even just comedians were flooding a lot of them were not necessarily, I don't even want to think that Chris Raygun or necessarily like Shoe Hit or somebody are Trump supporters, but the way that they spoke, enunciated, referred to liberal leaning and left wing people, the way that everything was about triggering the left and making everybody mad, the way that I think Chris Raygun, didn't he make a video saying like no, that was Hunter Avalon made that video. He's like, you shouldn't punch Nazis because you would attract more Nazis, or that everybody you disagree with isn't a fascist thing, or I'm not racist because I said the N-word. Shoehead stepped in it big because she called a black woman and said she looked like a primate, and she stepped in some shit big. And I'm not sure if she learned a lesson from that or not, because she kind of like wishy-washy. But yeah, back in these days, man, almost every YouTuber just had to make a video talking about if that old Trump mad, the liberals are crying and all this other shit, or about how violent people were because he won and shit, because people were trying to protest and people like the police or actual Nazis would go out and intimidate people, and then people be like, look, they're just triggered, they're mad because Trump. I think this cycle of right wing YouTube, and because I was coming out of it, because like I said, in meeting gay people, not even having a girlfriend, but meeting women that were pretty cool, getting deeper into like the punk rock community and skateboarding community, I was coming out of it. But it was the rest of society that had to take time to come out of it. But I think about the time Charlottesville happened, they gave everybody a quick, like, yes, there's actual Nazis around and they support Trump.
Further, I want to clarify that Chris is not an alt-righter.
No way.
Or even a conservative. I've talked to him, albeit briefly on Twitter, and he seems like he wants to separate himself from his older content, which admittedly had some really bad takes in it. In this very video, for example, he says that this clip of Richard Spencer Sieg Heiling and yelling "Hail Trump" is probably just trolling. To his credit, it's pretty obvious that Chris didn't know who the fuck Richard Spencer even was back then. Nobody I certainly really didn't, and I don't think most left-leaning anti-SJWs did either. That doesn't make Chris or any of these other left-leaning anti-SJW YouTubers completely innocent of spreading harmful misinformation like this back then, but it is important to talk about why stuff like this happened. I think that a lot of it had to do with the mindset that everyone in the anti-SJW community had when it came to the alt-right and racism. They seemed to believe, much like I did, that racism and bigotry was basically dead in America. Sure, there were some individuals who held some very negative beliefs, but there wasn't any actual systemic in the law discrimination that was easily pointed out or spotted. Because of this, they were susceptible to mistakes like Chris made in this very video, where he supplied with what should be enough proof to show Richard Spencer as a Nazi, But his response to that proof is basically, well, who knows? The mainstream media and the SJWs are calling everyone right of them a Nazi, and even if he is a Nazi,
Didn't
who
I just
cares?
say
He's
that?
just one guy. In hindsight, I know that hate groups started to rebrand and restructure themselves back in 2015. No one was going to support an ideology whose members march around in white cloaks or swastika tattoos screaming white power, so they took their recruitment to the internet, and they rebranded themselves. They didn't call themselves white supremacists or neo-Nazis anymore, they called themselves white nationalists or white identitarians, or the alt-right. The more cowardly of these kind nowadays call themselves libertarians and then just dog whistle their racist beliefs to their audience. But back then, the alt-right's representatives weren't buff dudes with shaved heads wearing wife beaters, they were clean-cut, tall, well-spoken men in suits. The trap that me, Chris, and his peers fell into was intentionally set to make people believe that Richard Spencer and his colleagues' ideas were palatable, or at least respectable. You would be surprised how easy it is to sway someone into defending white supremacy if you package it right. The consensus among a lot of people on the left side of the anti-SJW community was that all ideas should be allowed to be safely presented, and as long as you debate them in what seems like good faith and keep your cool, your ideas are valid. You would also get the more centrist takes like, I may not agree with a neo-Nazi.
That was a bad thing. Oh, he's going over to like all the horse shit that used to happen back in the day. Yeah, I don't really got nothing to add. I don't know why I paused it. But, oh wait, I paused it to say this. Is that, back in these days, there was not left-wing juggernauts on the internet just looking for a debate. Back in the day, you had like let's say it's like a feminist channel, right? Maybe she got like a BLM video, but like most of her videos are about like feminism and the things that women deal with. She has like, I don't know, about 1.2 subscribers, 1.2k subscribers, and this is like a very awkward girl. You can tell that she kind of has a hard time on camera. Then you'll have massive fucking accounts like Stefan Molyneux or No Bullshit or Sargon of Akkad, literally send like hate brigades at people to the point where a lot of people ran and left the internet, deleted everything. I think some people even probably, did worse, but they literally created harassment campaigns against people who disagreed with them. And they would claim that they just want to debate, but they didn't want to debate anybody. They just wanted somebody to just sit there while they berate them and harass them for 30-40 minutes. And ain't nobody gonna just sit there and take that. Most women ain't gonna deal with that shit. Somebody like Demon Mama, sure. Stardust, yeah. But like I said, they didn't exist on the internet the same way as they do now. Like I said, a lot of people back in the day who were left-wing YouTubers were very small. And I think the only thing you really had, also, you had like the Young Turks and the Majority Report, but those are different kinds of channels. They're not engagement channels. They're more news and discussion channels. So they would not engage people the same way as these other YouTubers do.
But I will kill or die for their right to free speech. So I want to say again, I don't completely blame Chris for some of the mistakes he made back in 2016 during the peak of anti-SJW YouTube. I mean, if I did, I would be a hypocrite. This whole story is about how I was radicalized to the right in 2016. But it was a really weird time for a lot of political YouTubers, and most of them regret the stuff they've said, so don't go harass them on Twitter or anything, please. So to summarize the content that Chris Ray Gun made back then, it basically made a joke out of all the things going on in politics. Most of it was completely harmless on its own, but ideas such as Richard Spencer is probably just a hardcore epic memer who's trolling the mainstream media had been put in my head, even if it was a misinformed accident. I started to binge all of Chris's videos. I really enjoyed them. However, the ideas that were communicated through his content did start to change the way how I thought about things quite a bit. The best way I can summarize my change in thinking and worldview is in two song parodies made by Chris Ray Gun himself. One is a parody of The Times They Are A-Changin', and the other is a parody of We Didn't Start the Fire. The main idea of these two songs is that back in the day, we gamers and young people in general had to deal with old old, out-of-touch conservatives doing things like blaming school shootings on violent video games and technology, and people like Jack Thompson trying to get games banned. However, in the latter halves of the songs, the tables are turned, and he starts to show clips of feminists and SJWs saying that video games cause sexism and violence against women. The implication of this is that back
the
then...
very, like, simple-minded criticism. I'm gonna go for, like, 10 more minutes, but yes, I hate this shit looking back at it, because it's like, dude, the most, like, we used to have the most simple-minded, irresponsible, and ignorant criticism of, like, people like Anita Sarkeesian. And then when you go back around and you rewatch these videos and you think about things like armor, for instance, or female character design, you start to see how a lot of, you know, things in society, the way that we see things, the way that things are just made, might inform people to be more sexist. But we were so thick-headed, so ready to quote-unquote stand up against something, that we would say, like, you say sexism is real, but this woman is a strong warrior who cares about her outfit. Or that, oh, you say women are oppressed, but you're getting Patreon bucks from these videos. You know, we used to have the dumbest fucking criticism, man. And looking back at it, you know, any of the motherfuckers I used to watch back in the day, like Dr. Shane, Thunderfoot, Blair White, even a few Nazis got in there, which make me want to throw up, because these people, you know, they want to kill people. Stefan Molyneux or Andy Worski. It's just like, man, how in the fuck, bro? Well, like, I guess I'm speaking for me. I ain't speaking for this guy right now. How was I so stupid? How?
Conservatives were the enemy of people like us, gamers, but now the SJWs and feminists were the ones that were out of touch and attacking the gaming community. As cringy as it may be, if you're a young straight white dude...
What helped, you know what, well, I guess what didn't help is that at the end of the day, you know, things are getting better now, but I cannot say this enough. Even women playing video games as it exists today in 2023 didn't exist the same way in the 2000s or the early 2010s. You rarely saw women who played video games on the internet or played video games regularly. Not to say that they didn't exist, but you didn't see it a lot. And the games that were associated with women were like Pokemon and The Sims, while guys played things like Call of Duty and what have you. And that's like, you know, nerd and alternative culture in general. Whether it's like rock music, especially the emo shit, or, you know, different kinds of clothing, or even to some extent, ironically, action sports, even like skateboarding. But, you know, that's a whole nother thing on its own. I gotta talk about that when I talk about Tim Pool punk ass. But these things are predominantly marketed towards men. These electronic devices, these you know, these mangas, these comic books, these TV shows and feature films are marketed mostly towards men. And not even just marketed towards men, a lot of women, you know, this is anecdotal, but a lot of women hate like superhero and, like, you know, gamer media. They find it to be pretty cringe. So you felt as if, you know, when women would criticize your video games, your music, your gamer subcultures and what have you, your comic books, your character design in video games, you felt that it was just a further escalation on attacks of women trying to outlaw the things that kept you happy. So, yeah.
Chances are, if you want to take on a label and be part of a community, that label is going to be gamer. From there, the YouTube algorithm did what it does best. It recommended videos from similar creators. Around this time, I also discovered Seanhead, who made some videos that she's admitted she doesn't agree with anymore. And after seeing all these examples of feminists and SJWs being crazy and stupid and even violent, I started to take on the label of anti-SJW, and even anti-feminist. Now, this doesn't mean I didn't support women's rights. I certainly thought I did. However, I said a lot of things like, I'm not a feminist, I'm egalitarian. I care about women's and men's rights. I remember one night I was staying up late watching a Shoe on Head video when she brought up a movie called The Red Pill. This was the first time ever encountering this term besides seeing The Matrix. I never watched the Red Pill movie itself, but I did watch June's cover of it, and it reinforced a lot of my beliefs.
4 more
and brought
minutes.
up a few new ones.
I
For
get
those
it.
of you who don't know,
She
The Red
can
Pill
wait.
was a
I'm driving,
documentary
so she
made
can
by a
wait.
feminist named Cassie J, chronicling her experience interviewing several prominent men's rights activists and attending several MRA rallies. Cassie comes into this whole thing very skeptical of these MRAs, but as the documentary continues and she talks to them more, her opinions of these men changes, and she is...
Yes, because back in this time period, the idea of somebody lying for profit or lying to sell a political narrative was unheard of. Like back in the day, you'll see like a a woman, red pillar, a trans right winger like Blair White, a black Republican or conservative, or Hispanic conservative, whatever, and you would think like, man, this person went from left wing to right wing. They're not grifting for money and profit or just saying what they're told to say at this given point in time. They're honestly doing it. The idea of people lying for profit and lying to push a certain narrative or of victimhood or ignorance or duress, it was unheard of back then. But now we know about this phenomena of people lying regularly to promote various political predilections. But like I said, at this time, about 2015-16 up to 2017, it was unheard of that somebody would just be totally full of shit and talking out of their ass.
is pleasantly surprised by how nice they are. To her, they don't seem like women-hating pigs like she'd originally assumed. They list all sorts of issues men face that are oftentimes not talked about in the mainstream
Mostly
media.
caused by
Things
capitalism.
like men's suicide rates, injuries, and deaths in the workplace.
Thanks,
and homelessness.
capitalism.
Not only that, but the rallies that
Deregulations
Cassie
of
attends
safety
only
in the
have a few
workplace.
dozen MRAs, and they're outnumbered by feminist
And a lack of
counter-protesters
unions.
who are portrayed as antagonistic and mean. They yell and picket and call the MRAs pathetic as they talk about genuine men issues. While I didn't have the money at the time to watch the movie, I saw a bunch of clips of it through anti-SJW coverage of it. Seeing a documentary about a young, misguided feminist realizing that women actually have it way better than men felt cathartic for me. This was only magnified when I discovered a video by PragerU called The War on Boys. This was a video of a feminist by the name of Christina Hoff Sommers, someone who I now know as a TERF who had
We're almost going to wrap this up. Yeah, TERFs are technically just right wing anyway. The thing about PragerU and that fat bastard Dennis Prager, PragerU did not start off as a right wing think tank. Swear to God. PragerU first started off as a history video vlog, and it slowly drifted its right wing predilections into its videos about 2014, 15, and 16, because PragerU had videos that you could legitimately learn U.S. history from. It would be just like shit you were reading a school book, so things were left out, but they weren't lying and trying to reframe history in such a way to fit a right-wing narrative. For instance, my favorite example about when PragerU kind of rubbed me the wrong way was this video about the Vietnam War. Like, oh, how did America lose Vietnam? And everybody wanted out of the Vietnam War at this time. It was very unpopular. So Lyndon Johnson, of course, left. And I think Nixon left a little bit later. There was a lot of black ops shit going on. But basically, Lyndon Johnson drew down American support and firepower in the Vietnam War. And it was a bipartisan, thing. It was a bipartisan thing in deciding to leave out of the Vietnam War. But the video explicitly started to say that Democrats didn't provide the Vietnamese with the firepower and support necessary to defend Vietnam. This selective framing was rare. And then that's when I started, because, I was always into history. And this is how I started to kind of know there's something wrong with PragerU.
thought. explaining that boys are being targeted and put down in the school system. The combination of these videos made me feel oppressed. It may sound dumb, but as a straight white dude who's been told I was privileged my whole life, it felt good to have someone, a woman no less, explain to me that there's actually an agenda out to get me, most likely being perpetuated by feminism. I don't think this was the intention of Chris Ray Gun, Shoe on Head, or any of the other YouTubers in the more left-leaning part of the anti-SJW community, but regardless of intention, this was the result for me and a lot of other people. After watching their content for a while, I started to think things such as Antifa is a terrorist organization, SJWs are ruining media, colleges are SJW hellholes where you will be assaulted just for being a straight white man. It wasn't like they were just telling me these things and I believed them. They showed videos of it happening too. For example, a video of a white dude with dreads being yelled at by a black woman in a lecture hall about why his hair is offensive. A video of an Antifa member bashing a guy in the back of the head with a bike lock, and I discovered Jordan Peterson through a video by Chris where he featured a clip of Peterson in an argument about pronouns with a student. Through a combination of shoutouts and collaborations and the YouTube algorithm recommending me videos with the same metadata as the ones I was already watching, I started getting into people who were a bit more extreme, like Sargon of Akkad and Thunderfoot. To my credit, Sargon wasn't quite as pathetic as he is now. At the time, he was pretending to be a liberal and claimed he was on the left. As for Thunderfoot, he stopped doing the anti-SJW stuff a while ago, and he does cool science videos now that are actually quite good. Their content was definitely drier and a lot more boring than Shu or Chris or Armored Skeptic or The Amazing Atheist, but at this point, I was down for it as long as it had an anti-feminist slant. I believed at this point that feminism was out to get me, and not just as a straight white dude, but as a gamer. It was the anti-feminist stuff that pushed me down the pipeline the most, probably because that part started as far back as when I was 13 years old in arguments with my mom. She didn't make things any better in 2016 and 2017 either. One night I fell asleep watching an Amazing Atheist video about feminism on my phone, and she came into my room to check on me while I was sleeping. I woke up to my phone gone the next morning. I went to ask her if she'd seen it, and she began yelling at me, calling me a woman-hating misogynist. Apparently after the Amazing Atheist video ended, the YouTube autoplay eventually queued up some video of a feminist getting beat up.
Even Amazing Atheist, made a video criticizing his past views on feminism and the way that he made and marketed his videos. We gotta wrap this up soon, but yeah, I can totally relate to this. Even though, luckily I always had my own separate room that was on the second floor so I could close the door. I mostly always played videos on YouTube through my game system, like my Xbox 360 back in these days, and my Xbox One later. And basically, dude, it's just that you'll watch a video, it could be kind of like comedically criticizing feminism, and it could even be by a more liberal person like Chris Reagan or Shoe on Head. And then the next couple of videos, even if you're paying attention, it can go to like I said earlier, like it'd be like Blair White and Ben Shapiro, or like Dave Rubin was starting his grift at this time too, so he would pop up sometimes. But then it could take you to the dark places because YouTube didn't really pay attention to his TOS back then, both when it came to copyright infringement and hate speech. So you will wind up with people like Stefan Molyneux talking about like the Elliot Rodgers shit, or you will find like Sargon of Akkad videos, or or any manner of just like some black guy. You will find, even though he's not a Nazi, I'm just saying like he'll be in an algorithm. I was trying to go from, people that were bad influences to people that were the worst influence, but some black guy is not a Nazi. I don't think so anyway. My point being is just that, one video will lead you to another, and it wouldn't be because you're looking for content that is promoting hate speech. It's just that the algorithm would just lead you places that you didn't necessarily want to go, if that makes sense, because you might just want to laugh at feminists, but then you get led to videos where they actually want to do physically bodily harm to people who are feminists.
for something like that. My mom was not happy, and she took my phone away and called me a woman-hating pig. This just pushed me further down the pipeline. By early 2017, I believed that feminism was simply evil, and that they were out to destroy men as payback for the past or simply because they wanted supremacy of some kind. I binge-watched Sargon videos where he ranted about Gamergate and Anita Sarkeesian and Brianna Wu and the evils of feminism destroying Western culture. At the time, it didn't seem like baseless rants to me because he always had some BuzzFeed article about manspreading to use as an example, and that was all I needed to be convinced that these people were a real problem.
God,
I learned that not only were the
fucking
SJW
manspreading. I will never forget that shit. I actually used to watch both, I guess you could say, liberal, feminist, and right-wing content back in the day. The manspreading shit it was so fucking ridiculous, man. I don't understand why on either side it was ever an uproar about this. Me exiting the video, obviously, construction wear. Oh, I know that already. But anyway, this is gonna be the end of this video. I have to go pick up my wife from work. It's about 7:46 right now. She's off in 15. If you enjoyed my video, like and subscribe. But what you should also do is go check out Xander Hall's full video talking about how he escaped the alt-right pipeline and how he became, just a better human. This story was very heartwarming, and his videos are a very good influence and something to learn from, especially if you like lo-fi hip-hop, you like the game, Minecraft, and shit like that, and you just want somebody who's not, yelling or being loud like I am. Xander Hall can be a wonderful alternative for people looking for that kind of thing. I hope you have a good rest of your day, and hopefully you learned something here.